Hello, and welcome to the VtES podcast, where we talk about all things Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. Today, we are going to talk about another archetype, one that I am reasonably unfamiliar with, and so I guess I'm gonna need some help with that. Before I go on, just like to make a big shout out to Mark. Thank you for his new logo and the new look to the channel. And this is a reminder to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment in the comments below. And if you want to support the channel directly, you can do so at patreon.com/SokuOC. Alright, that's all the plugging out of the way. Let's introduce today's guest. Today's returning guest, actually. Once again, all the way from Iloilo, the one and only Johann. Hello.
Back.
You are back, yeah. And I'm glad that I've got you with me here today, because combat is not an archetype that I am intimately familiar with, but I hear it's one that you might be intimately familiar with.
Yeah, that's basically the Philippine meta. All combat all the time.
Ooh, ouch. For any of you who have missed out on the last two videos, Johann is also on YouTube. I'll put the link in the description below. Go check out his channel, like his videos, subscribe to his channel, and leave comments. And maybe someday he will stop just doing flesh and blood and do some VtES content. Having said that, he does have pretty good flesh and blood content, so if you're playing flesh and blood, also do check him out.
Yay.
Sorry about that, he's really shy about being plugged. So, combat, huh? I guess we should probably define what makes a combat deck. I think from my very limited experience with building combat decks, I would have to say that a combat deck is probably something that's heavily focused on using combat to oust the prey. So you'll be different from, say, a Bruce Bleed, which uses combat to encourage people to accept actions as they are, and probably also, well, actually, I guess maybe a wall deck would be like a subgenre of combat, where the combat is more, again, to discourage people from doing things.
Yeah, it's combat is basically the umbrella term for any deck that uses in simplistic terms, red cards, all the red cards in VtES. So if your deck is half red cards or 1/3 red cards, you can call yourself a combat deck. It's a generic, very general term.
Yeah, it's quite a broad term. I think
it's very broad.
And I think to properly be a combat deck, you probably also need like quite a number of actions to enter combat. Otherwise, I hear there's this thing called Combat Jam.
Similar to our first episode or second episode, I forgot which one, about the stealth bleed, where you can jam on stealth cards. Combat cards can also jam on red cards. So you gotta find a way to enter combat.
Yeah. Yep. So I think there's a good place to go through a few of, say, the strengths of combat decks. And I think first and foremost, as the name implies, this deck wins all combats. Well, it's supposed to.
Yeah, it's highly interactive. Is the word. In a 5-player table. You can interact with anyone. Especially if they have minions, you can just, hey, cross table. I don't like your face. Punch it. Stuff like that.
Yeah, and even though we said at the start, the definition that combat decks aren't the same as, say, a Bruce Bleed deck, it is still true that vampires in torpor cannot block. I hear that if all your prey and predators vampires in torpor, you have an infinite number of stealth.
Yeah, those are so we're talking about the strengths of combat?
Yeah.
But, yeah, if there's no one there to block you, you can do whatever you want. Usually just bleed for one, which is a sad situation if you're really a pure combat deck. You don't have enough card slots in your library to put in the extra bleed, but yeah, basically combat deck, get rid of people's vampires or minions. It can be an ally. You can get rid of minions.
Oh yeah, combat decks don't discriminate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Imbued, smash.
Imbued doesn't exist.
All right. Until the next expansion, maybe. Hint. No, I don't know. I'm just guessing.
But yeah, and I think you mentioned before that combat is a highly too many wombats down under. Yeah, so combat is indeed also a very highly interactive deck. I think also more so in terms of negotiation. I mean, you might not think combat is a very effective negotiating tool, but when you hold out your hand of red cards and you start doing this, a lot of people become very agreeable to terms.
Some people can call it bullying, maybe.
And some people call it bullying, some people call it negotiation, some people call it politics.
Making friends?
Making friends. Yeah. Or else, right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's in essence, the very essence of combat deck is to get rid of minions in the table. So that's a very strong leverage or threat because it's usually an investment in terms of pool. How much do you pay for a vampire? You bring out an inner circle, you bring out a Justicar, usually that's 10 pool, 1/3 of your life, and then suddenly, poof, it disappeared, or it's in torpor with no blood. So, where did my blood go? I didn't even have time to use a villain or minion tap.
Yeah, and I think that's both, I guess, the strength and the sort of the play pattern or the plan of combat decks, where you want to be in a situation where if you punch a minion into torpor or into the ash heap, you want them to be in a situation where they're not able to just be rescued and then continue doing whatever they want to do. So no blood generally is a plan, I guess.
Actually, what you just pointed out is actually, for me, it's also a strategy, because when you think about combat, because I know you don't think about combat.
No, I don't think about combat.
What you just said, rescuing a minion. How much blood does it cost to rescue a minion?
2 blood.
2.
Yeah.
So you can think of it as resource denial, because VtES is in basically resource management. You manage your pool, you spend the pool to bring out a minion, and then you oust someone, and then you get the resource back. So it's resource denial if you actually torpor or burn their torpor their vampires. Why? Other than the blood that they just spent to bring it out, or pool, and then the blood that they spent to rescue it, you're also denying them actions, because it needs a vampire to rescue. So that's one less minion to do something else. You're disrupting their game plan. You are denying, ousts cross table. You're stopping them from ousting their prey. So it's resource denial, which is, technically that's the meta game of combat. You deny your opponent, or you make them spend more for actions, make it cost more. That's one of them.
Make every action cost an extra rescue and an extra 2 blood.
Yeah, and if you actually torpor them, the example, potence, which is the most favorite combat discipline in the Philippines, is potence. So, a word of warning, if you want to play with us, we have a lot of potence decks here. Immortal Grapple is our favorite, Thorn Signpost, stuff like that. So anyways, potence usually punches vampires for huge amounts, like 5 or 6 or 8 or 9. That's almost all of the blood on the vampire. So even if you rescue them, they also have to hunt. So that's, oh gee, there's your whole turn wasted. 2 actions, all the blood gone. Next turn you do it again, send them to torpor, they rescue it again. So it's like Sisyphus. Ooh, Greek reference right there.
Look at us, cultured. And then he proceeds to drink out of a Gundam mouth. Different culture, right? So,
what happened?
So one of the things you mentioned is that you want, as a combat deck, or as a player of combat deck, you want to send your, your target, or even ideally the entire table's minions into torpor, but not burn them. Is there a reason why it's preferable to torpor rather than burn?
Yeah, that's actually the deeper strategy to combat. You cannot realistically burn or torpor everyone. You have to be very selective. And usually it's going to be your predator as a form of defense, or your prey as a form of, making your prey spend more pool, making them easier to oust. So in general, you really have to watch the board state, as I call it. Like, look at the table. See how many minions your predator has. If he's playing one big vampire, yay. It's usually good for you as a combat deck. However, if your predator is a weenie deck, them little small capacity vampires, that's going to be a lot tougher in terms of sending them all to torpor. So it's a delicate balance. You really have to watch the table. You have to watch your prey. What's he doing? Did he minion tap? That's fine. Makes it easier to punch. It's actually fine for combat decks. They like that.
That's true.
Or you really have to observe the board state.
Yeah.
And sometimes cross table, like, I don't know, shell games when someone's getting too strong.
That's true. Yeah. The combat deck is surprisingly well suited to what they call balance the table. Right. You there is a sort of like an advantage to your game plan if you're across table. Say there's a stealth blade across the table, and if you manage to go across the table and take out a few of his minions, it helps your game plan because, well, eventually you get around to them. And you don't want them to have too many VPs as well. And I think this also ties back to the negotiating tool, right? And then you can tell their prey and say, hey, look at this, I'm doing you a favor.
Not being so aggressive, or try not to bleed me. If you're a predator, I will rush your predator.
Yeah.
So it's a negotiation. It's really, like I said before, watch the table, watch the board state. You have to be clear on who to target. Very selective.
That's true.
Unless you're really combat, which is a different genre altogether. Different archetype.
That would be something we might explore in future. VT decks. But yeah, so I guess these are some of the strengths of combat deck, and I have to say, it's a bit, I guess, surprising or unexpected that even though the core strategy is relatively simple, you play a card that says enter combat with something, then you throw your entire hand of red cards on the table, and then you draw a whole hand full of red cards. I mean, in theory, right? Yeah. So in theory, that is the plan. But in practice, like you're saying, you can't just do that. You need to also sort of pay attention to what else is going on around you.
Mm-hmm.
And I
also,
think... yeah, sorry.
Let me just add the strategy on combat decks. Short chains are better. Because if you look at the combat cards in VtES, there is a pre-range, I don't know what I call it now, I guess it's before range cards, pre-range.
Yeah.
So all the stuff like Torn Signposts that you can play before range is determined. And then there's maneuvers. And then there's before strikes like Immortal Grapple.
It's just
and
Immortal
then
Grapple.
Before strikes are chosen.
Yeah.
So there's a window for each and every one of these. And then there's the strike card.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the after strike card like Wolf Claws or any aggravated damage. If you play them all out, you would have to have an ideal 6 or 5 card hand and then draw and replace and keep drawing 1 or 2 red cards. So in terms of building a deck of combat, the most efficient is just short chain. Keep it simple. 1 to 3 cards.
Yep.
Should be the most that you play it per round or per combat. Efficiency is key. Example, I guess, because I think some comments before were asking for examples of certain deck types or certain cards. So I'll just give a few examples like short-term combat, short chain, 3 cards, Torn Signpost, Immortal Grapple, and Disarm. The Philippines special. Just 3 cards. All you need are 3 cards. Sometimes you don't even need one of them. You can take out the Immortal Grapple, just Torn Signpost and Disarm. So if you keep your combat chain short, it's going to be more efficient.
That's true. You can also, it also kind of means that you can run a better balance of cards that are more defensive, like even cards like Minion Tab, Villain, Vessel, depending on how big or how small your vampires are. So definitely, like you said, if you're trying to hit a single card at every phase, you're gonna need, like you said, 5 or 6 different cards. And if you think about the number of combats you will probably go through as a combat deck in a game, and with a 90 card limit, you generally can't do anything else.
Yeah, definitely. Ideally, you should go through like pick 5 or 6 combats successfully, where you torpor 5 or 6 minions. That should be like the ideal target number if you're looking to make a decent combat deck. So keep it short, keep it simple. Otherwise, you'll run out of library, or you won't even have the cards to torpor people.
Yeah, definitely. There's no point in putting in a combat deck and have so many combat tricks, and then at the end of the day you realize you went through 5 combat where the opposing vampire just basically nothing happened to them. And
also you need card slots to rush, like a Bums Rush or a Minion Haven Uncovered for the generics.
Sure. I mean, there are sometimes tables where your prey is very cooperative and blocks everything and allows you to play combat cards. Those are rare.
Not here.
Yeah.
Well, we should also talk about the weaknesses, because we're actually kind of segueing there.
Yeah, that is a good point. So combat decks definitely, it's inherent to VtES, right? Like you said before, a lot of VtES, I mean, is a little bit rock, paper, scissors. Yeah. So
100%.
So if you bring a combat deck, one of the major weaknesses, and to be fair, there are ways around it, but one of the major weaknesses is evasive combat. And I think this ties back to what you were saying about combat chain lengths. So imagine you play something to increase your strength, like Tonsai Pose, and then
Carrying Crows.
and then maybe Carrion Crows, it's 2 cards, and then before strikes are announced, you play Mortal Grapple, which is a card that says playable before strikes are chosen at close range, and all minions can only strike hand strike.
Cannot dodge.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
dodge.
also.
And and then you land your punch, and the opposing minion goes in top one. That's good, but imagine if you fail to play a Mortal Grapple, and you play your strike card, say Roundhouse, which is pretty good new strike card, and strike for 3 damage. And you've played 3 cards, and the opposing vampire just has to play 1 card. Yeah, Majesty, the most common. I guess the most annoying if you're playing a combat deck.
If you're playing a combat deck, you should always plan for Majesty. That's like a guarantee. Someone on the table will play Majesty. So you build your deck with that card. You should always, how do I counter it? That's part of the basic deck building for combat.
Yeah.
How do I counter Majesty?
Because you kind of have to, right? It's evasive combat is one of the biggest sort of weaknesses for combat, and it's not just right combat ends as well. I guess it's yeah, dodge is annoying. I remember, I don't know if you would consider it a combat deck, but once upon a time I looked at there's a 10-cap vampire that says he always strikes first and he has dementation, and I thought he'd be cute with coma. And then I realized dodging avoids all of that and have no answer.
They paid 3 blood for that.
Yeah, you pay 3 blood for that. Yeah, so Coma is a strike card, costs 3 blood that says send the opposing vampire into torpor. Yeah. And then if they dodge it, they don't go into torpor, and it's as good as them having punched you back for 3.
With a dodge, taking no damage.
Yeah. So that's evasive combat is I think the most obvious weakness for decks. It is one, I guess, that you can get around with, like you mentioned, with good deck building.
Yeah, the proper deck. You have to choose the right tool to counter those things. An example, as I said, the Philippine meta loves combat, so we have Potence cards, Potence decks all over. Anyone that has Potence, like Bruja, sure, let's make one. Then there's Nosferatu, sure. And then, as a natural evolution, the Gangrel showed up. Hey, we have 42. So, and guess what? We prevent all of that 10 strength, 10 damage. Sure, we'll prevent it with 1 card, Skin of Steel. And hey, guess what? I play the Claws. Claws of the Dead or Wolf Claws. Hey, look, you went to Torpor. Oh, what happened? So there's part of the rock, paper, scissors. Look, the natural weakness of Potence is Fortitude. Then so they counter each other. Then there's the Gangrel with there's aggravated damage combat. So they just need 1 card. Just make your strike aggravated. What's the counter other than combat ends? The Bruja or anybody with celerity, they start dodging.
Yep, or they punch harder.
Or they go long range. They maneuver to long range and then shoot you with guns. So in combat, there's a mini rock, paper, scissors. So Potence, Fortitude, then what's the counter to damage prevention? I did this in our local meta. So I did Thaumaturgy. There was a Gangrel who combined Potence, Fortitude and Protean. So I came up with Thaumaturgy and Fortitude. So I just stole their blood. They can't prevent it. Steal blood, steal blood.
And then you prevent their aggravated damage in return.
Yeah, so it's rock, paper, scissors, even in the world of combat. More things to consider. Other than the usual weakness of, I have too many red cards, or I have too many rushes and I don't have combat cards. The hand jam, that's normal. You have to think others, like, what's the counter to my deck? And it can happen on the table.
That's, I think, a very interesting point that you brought up as well. And this probably ties back to when you mentioned short chain combats. The longer your combat chains, the more likely you're going to cycle into non-combat cards. And I think combat decks, even though Stealth Bleed is their natural prey, combat decks tend to share this problem with Stealth Bleed, where you cycle, and then all of a sudden you realize, hey, I'm missing something.
Yeah, it's card hand jam. Also, another problem is, I think you mentioned this earlier, or I did. I forgot. It's been a few minutes, but I forgot.
Who's tracking, right?
In the ideal world, hey, look, everyone's in torpor. Now what? I bleed for one every turn.
Hey, in 30 odd turns, you have a victory point. Okay, maybe
I'll
20.
20 turns or 15 turns. So it does happen. It really happens. So there are problems, but thankfully the new cards, I just pulled up this one. It's Hakim's Law. Hey, look. It solves two things. It solves a hand jam and the bleed problem. So it says, during a bleed action, you can discard a combat card to get +1 bleed. So, look. I discard a combat card and I get a +1 bleed. So that's 2 birds with 1 stone. So I actually like the new design for these cards. I haven't really played with them so much, but I am appreciating the design choice. One last thing I need to mention. I just saw this. It's pretty cool. It's kind of awesome. What's this called? Priority Contract. Yeah. It's also a tribal. So it says, I'll just paraphrase, it's too long. Choose a Banu Hakim you control, put this on someone else, then you can enter, pray only. That chosen Banu Hakim can enter combat as a +1 stealth D action. So this solves the problem of how to enter combat. And the best part, this is the best part. If the attached minion is about to leave the ready region, meaning torpor or burn, you can burn this card to gain 3 pool. Hey, look, it's defensive. I actually bloated by killing you, or I gain 3 pool. So I love the new design, especially for this 5th edition Banu Hakim deck. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it actually plugs one of combat's, well, it's not so much a weakness of combat itself, but a weakness of the combat deck, where you kind of always need to dilute your combat strategy to put some defense, right? Because otherwise you are forced to just keep rushing backwards and backwards and backwards.
And that's bad.
I mean, in theory, you still end up with 2 victory points and the game win.
I don't know if you can edit this, or maybe you can post a meme. There are memes. There are VtES memes. There's a VtES meme about combat, like, okay, the Vin Diesel one. So there's a combat deck, and then there's a bleed deck. And then that's the Vin Diesel and Paul Walker. I'll see you at the other side. So meaning the combat deck went upstream, and the bleed deck went this way. It's a Fast and the Furious meme. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, there are a lot of VtES memes about combat. I guess it kind of shows that some people really love it, some people really hate it, and some people really just love to hate it.
Well, historically, it's really harder for a combat deck to win a damn table. It's so hard.
Yeah, I mean,
If you compare it to the two previous archetypes that we mentioned, bleed and politics, and then our third archetype is combat, this guy will never get as many VPs as these two.
yeah,
Ever.
because your core strategy is not direct pull damage. It is in a way indirect pull damage, because your prey spent resources bringing out your prey spent pool bringing out vampires and allies, and then you just send them into Topo or to the airship. But yeah, you have a little bit less control over how much pool is being spent there and how much pool is lost there. So yeah,
Which is,
I think so in the 20 over years that VtES has been around, there's been a few cards that tries to get around the problem of, a combat deck can only bleed for one. They've got cards like Fame. I don't
from
know
the
why.
base set that we had.
Yeah, I don't know why Fame strikes me as a very annoying card. Maybe recently someone played it on one of my vampires. I don't know.
I was gonna say, maybe someone played it on you.
Yeah. So Fame was one of them. It's the oldest because of the combat enabler. What else is there? There's also
Dragonbound.
Dragonbound. So Dragonbound.
Although I hate it. It costs one hand power.
Yeah, so Dragonbound is an event that is a Gehenna event, -1 hand size while it's in play, and then is it everyone? I think it's everyone burns pool equals to the number of minions in Torpor, vampires in Torpor. Each turn.
Tension in the ranks.
Yeah, tension in ranks. It's a very
Almost the same thing.
It is, but it's also a very sort of good mix together with Fame. And it encourages, and I think you mentioned this before, right? Like you kind of have to play differently when your target has a few big vampires, or if your target has many small vampires, and that sort of gets reflected in cards like Fame and Tension in Ranks, where Tension in the Ranks encourages you to go after many minutes, and Fame encourages you to go after the 1 minion over and over again. But yeah, that's like 3. Maybe there's like 1 or 2 more other cards other than Fame, Tension in Rank, Dragonbound, and Hakim's Law. I think some of the bloodlines may have some, but it's across all of VtES itself. I would consider that a very limited amount of ways to inflict pool damage.
Yeah, but these are the top 3 specifically because they're generic. Any deck can use them. That's the main appeal. That's why all combat decks will always include Fame, Tension in the Ranks, and Dragonbound. It's a package set. So automatic. You put that in. Automatic. No questions asked. Along with your red cards, put those in.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, I have a note here that says overzealous combat can lead to an unbalanced table. Remember previously when we were talking about strengths of combat, where you can balance the table, help allies interact with the table basically, right? But there's also, this does come down, I think, more to player rather than the actual combat deck itself. Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen situations before where, someone just ignores everything else and goes straight for specific targets, and then what do you put it? Your Grand Prey gets a big advantage if your prey has no vampires. I mean, you do as well, but you don't want to be in a situation where you cause the problem.
This is part of the balancing the table, but also it's one of the skills that a player needs to develop when playing combat decks. You really have to observe the board state, which is what you said, an imbalanced table. Personally, I don't really care about imbalanced table. Well, because for me, I really go after my prey. You're called prey for a reason. You're 6 cool. If I'm a combat deck, I actually try not to go upstream and attack my predator. I attack the prey. I make them really suffer because they're the prey as much as you can.
Yeah,
that, within the realm of logic.
I mean, you don't want to end up creating saltiness on the table.
That's sadly part of combat decks. They're highly interactive, so even if I don't want to interact with you and you're knocking on my table, on my door, like, no, get away, go away. So it can lead to some negative feelings, but dude, it's just a game. Try to remember that at least. And then the next day you build a new combat deck to fight him. Yeah. Welcome to the Philippines.
So let's circle back a little bit and talk about I think we did talk about it in bits and pieces over the course of this chat so far, but let's circle back a little bit and talk about your typical gameplay for a combat deck. How would you, given that you're intimately familiar with combat mana, how would you describe a typical gameplay and game plan for a combat deck?
On the average, and this is where the salmon swimming upstream memes are coming from. Average, the gameplay, it's you usually attack one vampire of your predator as a defensive measure. Example, especially if it's stealth bleed, I mean, you will definitely want to punch his lights out. You don't want to be bled for 6 or 5 pool. So typical play would be bring out your combat minion vampire. Sometimes it's a star vampire. The star combat decks usually have one vampire that can rush as an action. So like Wind from the really old school Gangrel, which is super popular in the Philippines.
I would have thought Beast is a more popular.
Dance from Shell Games too. Dance plays a lot of Beast because he's originally a Nosferatu player. He loves Beast, the Leatherface. So a vampire that can rush. Theo Bell, also amazing.
Yeah.
So bring one dude out. So if your vampire can rush, you don't need cards to enable combat. So, and usually you do go after your predator just to, buy yourself some breathing room. He needs to either rescue it, or if you manage to successfully torpor, rescue it, or you put the fear of the Lord in it, so you won't try to bleed you so much. Or you're super successful that he brings out 2 minions in a delayed fashion because he doesn't want to get pummeled. So it gives you time to focus on your prey.
I always thought it was just flexing.
I call it breathing room. To give you more time to bring out more minions from your own to diablerize people with.
Ooh. So, other than Fame, Dragonbound, and Tension, is there any other way combat decks would typically try to oust prey, or you kind of just slow roll it with Bleeds for 1?
For combat decks, it's highly recommended, and sadly, it will dilute your deck. For me personally, I cannot build a deck without defense. Defense is key. I need defensive cards. It can be as basic as Intercept, which is meh. Doesn't really do much. You block them, you torpor them, yay, you're now a wall deck. Which is a different combat archetype. But for me, I actually prefer bounce. If your clan can bounce like La Sombra, dominate potents, or Auspex can bounce. So that's one rule.
So use your predator to oust your prey, basically.
you beat up the prey so they can't block. Then your predator bleeds you, and then you bounce it. Hey, look, it's unblocked because strategies. You mentioned the previous archetype was bruise bleed, so that's another way. So it's bleed cards, as simple as dominate, yay, so OP. Or present for the Bruja. So hey, that's my son in the background. Don't mind him. Try to block him. Anyways,
it's fine. The pleasures of working from home.
Yeah, so bleed cards. It dilutes your deck. But as I mentioned, this one was pretty handy. You don't even need bleed cards. There was something here. What was that thing? The master card.
Yeah, Hakim's Law Retribution.
Prevent hand jam and gives you bleed, and it's just a master card, so you can reuse it. You only need 1 or 2 copies.
Yeah,
if you put a card like a Govern, how many cards do you need? There's so many slots. Precious card slots.
It definitely opens up a lot of deck design space and play styles as well. So let's talk about some of the things to note. I mean, we've talked about quite a fair bit of it, but let's talk about some of the things to note when playing a combat deck. I heard before that typically you want to pick on easier targets, softer targets.
Yeah, I mean, it happens that your prey is a wall deck. I mean, it does happen. It's hey, look at a Chimichi, or a Gangrel. So, maybe let's not bother him for a minute. So let's go after a Predator who's just a bleed or a weakling vote deck. Let's punch his lights out. So yeah. Also, time your rushes. You can't just enter combat whenever you want to. Yeah, what you said, pick a weaker target. You spend less cards. Sometimes all you need to do is enter combat and just hands for 1. Hey, no cards spent. Look, no resources.
And it's also
so that's
and it's also good for targets for fame, right? You typically want to target, say, a small capacity vampire that's easier to send into torpor than say an inner circle. I mean, sure, you can send the inner circle in torpor and it looks great.
Really?
But at the same time, yeah, it's also harder. So, I mean, fame works regardless.
The smaller the vampire, the better. Also, why? Not just from what you mentioned, but the smaller the vampire. Example, a 2-cap. Hey, what discipline do they have? Obfuscate? Sure. It means they can't defend themselves. The vampires without presence. The vampires without celerity or dodge. So yeah, pick your targets wisely. Again, keep saying this. Observe the board state. Be selective.
So what I'm hearing...
It's not brainless.
It's not brainless. So what I'm hearing is this is not stealth bleed.
Yeah. Not stealth bleed. You are highly interactive. Stealth bleed has almost 0 interaction.
I mean, stealth bleed interacts very well with its prey. Interact.
The prey can't even block you. Can't even interact.
But yeah, definitely, you're right. And I agree with you. We can't stress this enough when you're playing a combat deck. You have to pick your target, read the table. Unfortunately, one of the strengths and also the weakness of combat deck is sending other people's minions into torpor means that there's a ripple effect, right? If you send your prey's minion into torpor, they can't bleed your grand prey. So later on, that becomes a problem for you. If you beat up your grand predators, vampires, for whatever reason, it makes your predator stronger, which then becomes a problem for you. So there's a ripple effect, and yeah. Coming back to stress again. Yeah, coming back to stress again. Pay attention to the table.
Do not rush indiscriminately. When I use the word rush, it means enter combat. It's an old VtES term. I guess we should explain that for new players. Rushing, like from the card Bumps Rush. Also in the base set.
Also in the base set.
Also generic.
A bit of off tangent here, but did you know that wake is now an actual keyword?
Yeah, it's not. It's a name.
No, it is. It's an actual keyword. If you read the new if you read a new printing for on the keyboard, it actually says something this vampire wakes.
Okay, yeah, I forgot. Now I remember that they did add a wake keyword. Okay, fine, sure. Maybe next time they'll add a rush keyword.
Yeah,
make it easier.
Fingers crossed.
It's simpler. I mean, note to Black Chantry if you are watching our humble little show.
If you like our suggestion, take it. If you don't like our suggestion, feel free to ignore it. Don't shut the channel down.
It keeps things simpler, rush, wake. So, it's key terms, keywords.
And although to a certain extent, even though these keywords evolve from really old cards and newer players might have a bit of difficulty trying to figure out how these keyword relate to the effect, I think there is value in thinking about it at least.
Like hunt. Hunt is a keyword.
I mean, hunt is a thing. Oh, hunt as a keyword, as a
keyword. There's a
noun.
An Arimani card.
Yeah, hunt as a noun, I think. Yeah.
Vulture's Buffet.
Yep, that's true. Anyway.
I have Shrek in my background. There's a hacker.
Anyway, that's a bit of a sidetrack. So in summary, combat decks, I guess, are surprising to me, surprisingly challenging to play well. Yeah, it requires a lot more thinking and you typically would think that the muscle-bound brute would have less brains, but it's not true in this case.
It's not Hulk Smash. It's definitely not Hulk Smash.
Also,
you will die.
Also, definitely when you're putting together a combat deck, definitely don't forget that you still need to oust, and you need to oust more than one prey. And don't forget that you need to stay alive to oust those preys. You need to think about putting in, like you said, the 3-card package, the 4 package of Fame, Tension and Ranks, and Dragonbound. And you also might need to think about some defense, maybe intercept, maybe dominate. And also
dominate solves everything.
Dominate solves everything. Of course, deflection solves everything. And also, I think you mentioned right at the very start of this video, or near the start of this video, short chain combats are typically better than long chain combats.
Efficiency is key. The less cards you use, the more efficient you are. It's way better. But I like your point. As I like to add something. I like the point that you mentioned. This actually applies more to wall decks. For intercept or wall decks, all you need is to be the last person standing. And then oust your prey, and then be the last person standing on the table. Normally that will give you the game win, if you do the math, I think. It's like...
Yes, something like that. We can talk about it in the wall archetype video. But yeah.
One of my favorites. I make so many wall decks. Auspex is my friend.
I remember the first time we played together. I think in 3 games you brought 2 wall decks.
Yeah, Jimichi is my favorite clan. One of my favorite clans.
It's a good thing they're still around in 5th edition.
Yeah, thank God.
It'd be interesting to see how they've sort of changed because vicissitude is no longer an actual discipline.
Alright.
Yeah, but I'm
They haven't
excited.
really started any vampires.
Yeah, I'm excited though to see.
What are the V5 disciplines of Chimichi? Animalism.
Dominate animalism. Sorry,
Oh, dominate.
dominate protean, I think, and then on all specs, I can't remember off the top of my head. So vicissitude became some sort of dominate protean mix. So they might actually have like 4 disciplines, maybe.
You had me at dominate. Yeah, we just need the source of aggravated damage. I'm good.
I'm sure you will have it. Anyway, yeah, I think we've come to the end of this episode. So thank you once again, Johann, for joining us today. I will put the link of his YouTube channel somewhere here, maybe, and then also in the description below. Go check it out, like his videos, subscribe to his channel, drop a comment. I want to say he responds fairly often.
I respond once a week.
That's fairly often. And yeah, if you like this video, do also remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment in the comment section below. And again, if you want to support the channel directly, you can do so over at patreon.com/SwakuOZ. And I also like to take this opportunity to shout out again to Mark for his great work in the new logo and the new channel. And oh my god, that is a lot of YouTubey stuff.
But seriously, leave a comment if you found any of this useful, or if you had any questions or clarifications. We will try to answer. I do reply.
Yep, you do reply. Yeah, so thanks again, and until next time, see ya!
Bye, guys.